Good afternoon. I'm Alyse Killeen, managing partner of StillMark, a venture capital firm focused on investing in companies in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's my pleasure to be here today to speak with Monique Woodard of Cake Ventures. Monique is an investor with nearly a decade of experience. Prior to Cake Ventures, Monique invested at 500 Startups as a venture partner and at Lightspeed as a scout. Today, in addition to working at Cake Ventures and to leading the portfolio and team there, Monique is an advisor at SoftBank. Some of her investments as a venture partner and angel investor include Blavity, Silvervest, CourtBuddy, and Mented. And Monique has invested in the global startup ecosystem, including the US and Africa. Before moving on to the investor side, Monique spent 15 years in the tech industry as a startup founder and product-focused operator. And she launched Black Founders, a national community of tech entrepreneurs and operators. She now regularly invests and speaks, writes, and advises on areas of consumer technology, emerging demographics, and diversity. Monique, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to chat with you today about investing, coronavirus, what that will look like, what the world for startups will look like post-coronavirus and now. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I thought we'd start with talking a bit about Cake Ventures' mandate. Cake is focused on big demographic changes. You say that you're investing in where we're going, not where we came from. And these trends, the trends that Cake is focused on, are inevitable. They're certain in an otherwise dynamic and incredibly uncertain environment. COVID-19 and the pandemic recession have had an impact across sectors, but the trends you're focused on are relatively stable. Could you walk us through the three areas that Cake Ventures is dedicated to?
Sure. So I've been investing for a really long time. And when I started Cake Ventures, I sort of looked at my portfolio and said, what am I saying with these investments? What is the story that's being told here? And it's really a story of demographic change. Changing demographics are changing the way that we should be investing in technology, changing the way that we should be thinking about technology and our users as we start new companies. And so for me, there are three big demographic changes that are happening right now. And so those are the 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every single day. The aging market was previously woefully under innovated, but now we're starting to see new companies come to the forefront to create innovation around this very unique point in life. And I think that as we see coronavirus, social unrest, all of these things happening, people are still going to age, and people are still going to need to think about retirement. They're going to need to be really, really mindful, especially mindful in the age of COVID, about how they take control of their own healthcare, right? And as unemployment rises, people are starting to delay retirement even longer. They're going to need to think about how older people show up in the workplace and how companies are helping them actually thrive at work. And so that's the first layer of the cake. The second layer of the cake is companies that can get to billion-dollar outcomes based on the economic activity of women. So we've seen a lot of this before in companies like Glossier, Rent the Runway, The Real Real. Now we're going to start to see it outside of consumer retail and moving into categories like women's health. Carrot Fertility is a really good example. So is Modern Fertility or Tila. Again, coronavirus is just making us more apt to want to take control of our healthcare and take control of our healthcare outcomes from what I call period to menopause, right? And so really being mindful of the ways that women experience healthcare in very different ways is really important. We also see it in fintech and financial services, the ways that women spend and save money differently. I think a company like Elvest is a really good and clear example of that. And then, of course, the future of work with a company like Chief. Women are showing up in the workplace, but certainly continue to need our support systems to move up the ladder. And then the final layer of the cake for me is this shift to majority minority, where people of color become the majority in the United States and are already a global majority if you're building a global company. And so I think, now we're seeing massive social unrest around racial inequality in the U.S. And I think I like to think of these issues as a last gasp of a changing culture, right? And we are seeing these come to fruition today, and I'm hoping that over time we'll see decreases in racial inequality. But what's happening is that there is an outcropping of new culture that we are starting to see, in a new power culture, and that is creating strain against the existing power structure. And it's not just cultural; it's also economic. Um, Latinx, Asian, African American populations have increasing spending power and are using it really wisely. If when you talk about Gen X and millennials, a lot of people see these groups as driving technology adoption. But what a lot of people fail to go on and say is that these generations are largely people of color.
Right. Thank you for that. I want to dig in a little bit on a point that you brought up, which is the impact that coronavirus, the pandemic, recession, unemployment, as well as the concurrent civil movement against police violence and institutionalized discrimination. You talked a bit about how those will impact the three layers of the cake that you're focused on, the demographic shifts. I wonder if we could dig a little deeper about how the stable long-term trends that Cake Ventures invest against is impacted by these really dynamic and uncertain times. Do you expect that, for instance, the composition of your portfolio will change, or the needs of your companies or the needs of your founders will change?
I definitely see the needs of founders changing. I have founders in my portfolio now, and at the beginning of shelter in place and COVID, we were very concerned with, long-term stability. And so I worked really closely with a lot of those companies to figure out, the very clear markers of success. What's your burn rate? How much are you spending? And really, I think that companies that are going to be resilient during this time are going to be those companies who think about ways to reduce burn when they need to and be really resilient there, but also really take into account the fact that education is changing, for instance, and we're doing more at-home education and what that means for children and families. So, of course, that impacts a couple of areas. That impacts women, because women are often the people who are holding the brunt of childcare, and also often juggling a full-time job. And so I think there are opportunities to make that much easier for women, tackling that second layer of the cake that I talked about, making that much easier for women. So I think that companies are going to be identifying really big opportunities that come out of coronavirus and rampant unemployment and shelter in place and all of these things that are happening now, and turning those into long-term plays that take advantage of the shift in culture, in societal pressures, and in demographics. I look for companies that can be resilient and really understand how to weather the different economic storms. And so far, I've just been incredibly impressed by the way that founders have either pivoted in some ways, or taken something that was much later in their roadmap and moved it up in the roadmap to take advantage of today's climate, or just been really thoughtful about the ways that they approach everything from acquisition to fundraising.
Right, great. And I want to hit on fundraising specifically because I've heard from founders, and I imagine you have heard the same, that there's some uncertainty about how to approach fundraising in the current environment, and uncertainty of where VCs are, and if the dynamics of fundraising have changed at all. So for the founders in the audience today, can you talk a bit about how fundraising as well as business development and company growth changes given the current conditions?
Definitely. I think that, when we first went under shelter in place and when COVID first really hit the United States, there was a little bit of a pause from VCs around fundraising. And I think that now that we've had some time to sort of collect ourselves and understand, where companies are and potentially where the market is going a little bit more. I think that a lot of VCs have started to be a lot more confident about starting to reach out to founders and do new deals that often originate without, meeting in person. So I'm seeing much larger uptick in that. I will say from a personal level, I think that um, good VCs who have been present and have been not taking their foot off the gas as much. I think that our deal flow has continued to thrive even during this really challenging time period, and which is great for founders because we're actually willing to get on Zoom, create those new relationships, and in a lot of cases make those deals in a completely new way. I think that what some of the things that we're thinking about and that we're looking at is uh, is the market that this founder is going after, is it growing or is it shrinking due to COVID? And in some cases, I certainly have had founders pitch something that is directly COVID related. And while I think you should be thinking about the impacts of COVID on your business, I'm really looking for a company that is going to thrive over 5, 7, 10 years versus an immediate response to COVID right now that is only relevant for this particular time period. I also, again, you go back to the idea of resiliency. You know, while we are still continuing to look for big outcomes, and a unicorn, company is always attractive. I think right now the companies that are going to thrive in this moment are more like camels. They're able to gather resources and save them for a very long journey, right?
Right.
And so thinking about yourself and your company and thinking about how you can be resilient over the long term, from when you decide to raise funds to how you decide to staff up and grow your team, to how you approach customer acquisition and what you're spending on a monthly basis, and really keeping a very clear eye on those things is going to be incredibly impressive to a lot of investors right now.
Right. That makes sense. Maybe if we could dig in a bit on how today's current conditions, both with the pandemic as well as with civil unrest in Silicon Valley's greater attention to discrimination that has long existed in the VC community. Maybe if we could talk a bit about how that impacts Black founders specifically. So I want to bring the subject up because prior to launching Cake Ventures, I know that you demonstrated just incredible access to understanding of and insight on the market opportunity targeted by folks coming from this category. Your angel investment portfolio reflects that, and you have your finger on the pulse here. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how the current environment may impact Black founders and tech talent specifically.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting few weeks for Black founders and for Black VCs, right? You saw a lot of firms come out with these Black Lives Matter pledges. You've seen a lot of companies commit to investing in Black founders, and to doing a better job of supporting Black entrepreneurs. Um, I think that when it comes to large venture capital firms who don't have a track record in doing that, I'm waiting to see the evidence of their words, right? I started Black Founders back in 2011 with, a handful of my friends because we were, going out and fundraising on Sand Hill Road as an entrepreneur. and not feeling that we were getting the fair consideration or the support or access that we needed as entrepreneurs at the time. And my move onto the investor side of the table was partially kicked off by the fact that I really felt that, we could be doing all the ecosystem building, all of the supporting entrepreneurs that we wanted to, but it was really important for me to be a face on the other side of the table who could really understand and support Black entrepreneurs in the way that they deserve to be. Um, so I'm starting to now see people open up their networks and say that they're really interested in investing in Black entrepreneurs. I am highly interested in seeing, large venture capital firms do this, but I'm also interested in seeing Black VCs get the support that they need. Lightship Capital just launched, just announced their upcoming fund 2 today. We're also seeing Base 10 Ventures just raised a huge $250 million fund. So there are lots of funds and founding GPs out there who should be getting the support that they need and who have really great insight and access into diverse founder communities. This isn't something that like a lot of us are having to figure out today. We've
Right.
already figured it out. Like we already have great access to Black entrepreneurs and to Black founders. And I think a lot of funds who don't have a Black partner on staff are going to be at a slight disadvantage to a lot of folks who have been here for a very long time and who have been, supporting Black founders with genuine work, access, and also dollars.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to reference one of Charles Hudson's recent tweets, Charles Hudson of Precursor Ventures, who talked a bit about a lack of funding specifically for Black women GPs. And what he said was this: there is a lot of current energy for backing Black GPs, but I feel deeply uncomfortable with the reality that most of us who will get funded are male Black VCs who have track records and previous work experience that makes this easier to fund than our Black female counterparts. So anyone that's been paying attention to the venture ecosystem knows that that's true. And it was great to see Charles bring that to the table for a public discussion. I'm wondering if you could share any insight you have on what's happening here. What is the opportunity for LPs that back funds led by or that include Black women GPs?
So I think it's really important for LPs to think about intersectionality and think about the ways that their funding decisions cut across not just racial lines, but also gender lines, LGBTQ lines, all of those things, because it's really easy, and I've seen LPs do it for a number of years, to say we're going to back this this group of all Black men led venture funds and have that be a check in their diversity box, right? Or have that be a marker of success for them. But then you have this entire swath of Black women who have not gotten the same access. The Arlen Hamiltons of the world, Candace Brackeen. I could go on and name really great Black women fund managers who, up until recently have not had that same level of access. And so I'm really hoping that and encouraging LPs to do a much better job of, looking at their investments through not just a racial lens, but also a racial plus gender lens. And, make those decisions with those things in mind, because there are differences. There are differences in access. There are differences in thesis. There are differences in points of view around investing. And I think that if you don't have the voice and the opinions of Black women at the table, then you're doing yourself and your portfolios a disservice. I would like to highlight Charles in particular because he's done a great job of being an ally and a supporter to Black women in venture. He has two Black women in his fund at his fund precursor, and they've also invested in a number of Black women entrepreneurs. And so I think it takes that kind of like true intentionality from the Black men GPs in the room, but also from the LPs in the room also to really be intentional about the way that they're allocating capital.
Right. And it does drive returns. Um, I wanted to bring us to the NVC 2018 NVCA, excuse me, survey that found that 93% of firms surveyed did not have a single Black investment partner. And I wanted to highlight the irony or missed opportunity there, because at the same time this is occurring, founders are now more than ever thinking about partner diversity when they're out fundraising, and perhaps even selecting firms for their cap table based on the partners they're working with and the diversity of partners at the firms that they're selecting. So partner diversity is more important than ever to founders. And I imagine, especially during current conditions of coronavirus pandemic and the civil discourse shifting, that is more important to founders than ever that that their cap table can be diverse. Um, and that founders believe this can help them optimize their own company outcome. Can you speak a bit about what you're seeing from founders when they're thinking through their fundraising strategy and who they want to partner with when they choose to take capital?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing more and more founders be intentional about understanding who is on the other side of their table and who they're partnering with when they're accepting a term sheet or accepting capital from a VC. I think the time when founders feel comfortable accepting capital from an all white male team who went to Stanford, right, a relatively homogenous team, is going to be going by the wayside. And it's because of some of those things that I talked about earlier. There are these big demographic changes that are happening, and they're impacting every single company. And so if you don't have someone on your team who can help a founder navigate through those changes, you're at a disservice. And founders are starting to recognize that as well. And it's not just because it's the right thing to do to have a diversity of partners in the partnership, but it's also the profitable thing to do to be able to help founders navigate what does it mean for my company now that Gen Z is largely people of color, or what does it mean for my company to now realize that I am selling to a much different market than I may have been 5 or 10 years ago. And you only get there by being, by having a diversity of people at the table to help you navigate that.
Right. So diverse GPs have diverse insights and on markets that are missed, as you said, by a homogeneous group, like a fraternity of guys that have all graduated from Stanford. So it sounds like this can link to ROI. So the returns produced for LPs, and then also the outcomes that founders can access. Can you walk us through maybe an example of a portfolio company that you've worked with that has been aided by having a diversity of investors on their cap table?
Definitely. But I'd also like to bring up the point before I jump into that. One of the things that currently and in the future, one of the things that could trip up even the strongest company are around issues of diversity and inclusion. So everything from sexual harassment to pay and wage gaps based on race and gender to to just like racial unrest within a company. And I think that having someone on your team, whether hopefully on your cap table, who can help you walk through those challenges early is really beneficial to founders. I think that we are getting to the point where if you're not thinking about those things early, those can tank your business. And so I think, a lot of my companies are led by diverse entrepreneurs, um, but although not entirely. And I think that for those diverse entrepreneurs who have had me on their boards, or on their cap table, or as a partner in some way, I've been able to navigate them through sort of minefields of, this investor told us this, but we don't necessarily know that that fits with the market that we're trying to go after. And having an understanding of what that market looks like and what that market thinks about, that the white guy who went to Stanford might not have, is really important. And so being able to have sort of that blended perspective to say, you know I think his part of the market probably thinks that, but what about this non-English speaking part of the market, or what about this part of the market who is at this income level? Having a secondary point of view is hugely important.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's been reflected in my own experience as well. How does that manifest on a board or within a company's close network of engaged and active investors? Have you seen those dynamics? So, what I mean by this is a diverse board composition benefit a company in the same way? And is Silicon Valley open to changing such that boards become more diverse?
Yeah, I think Fred Wilson just yesterday posted a piece on board diversity, and so I think that lots of well-established venture firms are thinking about how to get more diversity on their boards. I think Fred's point was like the board observer position is a really good lever to try to get a more diverse voice on the board. And so I would encourage founders to think about board observer positions and who might be a good person to have in that position if they already have a board that is not diverse, right? So
Okay.
I think even if you have a board today that's not diverse, it doesn't have to continue to be that way.
Right.
You can certainly bring diversity into and around the table. I have had the good fortune of being on a all women board, which is incredibly rare in this industry. And but to bring the intersectionality back, I was the only Black person on that board, and so I was able to bring in a perspective for that company around how their African American users might interact with or think about their product, and what are the cultural and demographic dynamics that are very different in those users. And I think that's highly valuable for a board to be able to provide the support systems for founders in that way. Also, when it comes to hiring, making sure that you have diverse hires at all throughout the company, but especially at the executive level. So being able to introduce founders to my network of executives that I've, worked with over the years in Silicon Valley, or, my close network of people that I know who are really good at building tech companies. You know, Everyone's network is really different. And so the more diversity you can bring to the table and come and bring to bear for a founder, the better you're going to be.
Right, absolutely. And one of the risks that I've seen companies have to face is that they don't think about diversity early enough in how they recruit and onboard talent. It's much harder to correct for that down the road when you have a team of 20 or 30, a homogeneous team. How early do you talk to companies about the diversity of their hiring practices and why that's important? And is there advice you can offer to founders in the audience today about how to get started early? And is it ever too soon to be thinking about this?
It's never too soon, and I start talking to founders about it almost immediately.
Okay.
um, because, as I said, these are some of the challenges that, if they're not thinking about it early enough, can really tank a company. Just like you earn technical debt around not taking care of some of the things that are, on your tech board, you end up accruing diversity debt by not taking care of the diversity inclusion challenges within your company. And it's much harder to rectify that kind of diversity debt when you're 20 people, 30 people, when you've started to become when you started to notice that your company looks incredibly homogenous. um, at that point, it's really hard for a person of color or a woman to come onto an engineering team, and even if they are amazing, feel like they belong in that company. So it's really about around the idea of creating a place where people can see themselves belonging and contributing to the long-term success of a company, and especially around product decisions, to having people who um, represent your users in the room.
Right. Thank you for that. We have about a minute left. Are there any thoughts that you want to leave the founders in the audience with today?
Yeah, I would tell founders that, founders have an immense amount of power, even when you don't feel like you do. You really do. And you are able to make decisions um, in who you take money from and who you partner with that will impact the long term success of your company. And in this period of COVID-19, and in this period of, rising unemployment and social unrest and racial inequality that's sort of been, had the lid lifted up on it, it's more important than ever for you to make those hard and challenging decisions for your company and for your employees. And you have the power to do that. And so I hope that they feel empowered in this moment to take control and to work with the people who are going to help them succeed and help them get to building the company that they believe that they want to work in.
Wonderful. That's a great piece of advice to leave with today. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with you, and I look forward to similar conversations in the future. Thank you, Monique.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.